Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Writer's Edge. I'm your host, Christy Stratus, and tonight we're going to be talking about magazines, book reviews, getting, and books accepted by both. So if you're not already subscribed to this channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can always know when we post a video. And now I'm going to attempt to introduce our panelists in about 60 seconds. They do. So we'll see how I do on that. So first we have Joseph Cotto, and he is the senior editor of the San Francisco Review of Books. He has covered current events and style for the Washington Times communities section. And that from now National Security Advisor John Bolton to Dionne Warwick. And Cotto is also a writer for Blog Critics Magazine and Yahoo's Contributor Network, among other publications. So we also have Monica S. Kuebler, who is a contributing editor to Rue Morgue magazine. If you haven't checked them out, check out their Facebook. It's really poppin'. You got to see them. Circulated out of Toronto, the magazine is the world's leading in horror and culture and entertainment brand, spearheaded by its multiple award-winning magazines. Rue Morgue Digital, the Rue Morgue Library Book Series, Rue Morgue Coffin Box Subscription Box, and Rue Morgue presents Cinema Cobb Movie Nights monthly film series. They've got a lot going on. We also have Eddie Generous, who is the editor of Unnerving magazine. The publication is circulated out of Powell River, British Columbia, and focuses on dark fiction with an emphasis on reviews, interviews, and a specialty on short story submissions. And they also host a podcast tied to the magazine. Alison McBain is a coordinating editor of Bewildering magazine, and Bewildering magazine is a weekly electronic publication featuring speculative fiction as well as nonfiction, namely poetry, articles, essays, reviews, and art. She writes both literary fiction and poetry. Currently, she has over 30 publications in magazines and anthologies, including Flash Fiction, Online, Abyss, and Apex, Gone Lawn, and Bards and Sages Quarterly. So thank you all for being here tonight. This is going to be an absolutely wonderful conversation. Some seriously experienced people here. And you guys know me. I am Christy Stratus, your host. I'm the author of the Dark Victoriana collection, which includes the books Anatomy of a Darkened Heart and Brotherhood of Secrets. And today, I just released a horror short story called The Subtle. Check it out pretty much anywhere where you can buy books. All right, let's dive right into it. We do have a couple of audience questions right off the bat that were collected ahead of time. If you'd like to ask ahead of time, you can join us on Facebook on The Writer's Edge Show. We have one from A.F. Stewart and Mandy Eve Barnett. Theirs are similar, and they're asking, how can authors find you guys for open submission calls and open review submissions? Like, are you listed anywhere in particular? And any of you can jump in first.
I guess for me, the easiest place is probably just you Google. You can find there's a site called the Submissions Grinder that shows everything. You can search just about any site. There's also Duotrope is another search site. They have a paywall, but they list agents as well. Then there's Horror Tree and Raylon and all these other little places. You can usually just Google search short fiction submissions and find stuff.
Does anyone else have any particular places? I have seen that Submission Grinder, was it that you said? I have seen that place before. It is loaded with stuff. Where else can we find you guys?
Well, the San Francisco Review of Books, just go to the website, and on the right-hand side of the page, there's a contact field. And if you want to submit something, you just go there, send the inquiry, and we'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. It's pretty straightforward. We don't really advertise our submissions anywhere else, but it's worked out pretty well so far. Sometimes the simplest might wind up being the best.
We're the same way. You can just go to our website, bewilderingstories.com, and all our submission guidelines are there. And we're always open for short story submissions, all the way up to novellas and novelettes. And again, similarly, we're always open to book reviews. So we're open year round.
Same thing goes for Rue Morgue. You can pop on the site and then look for the editor that would be the most appropriate person to pitch to. We don't have submission guidelines. We also don't publish fiction, though, so it's nonfiction. We like things that are timely, so if there's a film coming up or a book coming out, you know, try and you can definitely, if you can also land your own interviews, you can do any legwork yourself. Our editors love that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, just pop onto the website, find the contact you're looking for, and do a pitch. You know, we've got a fairly robust stable of writers, so we're not often out looking for new writers. But you know, if there's experienced journalists or someone who's got a real talent and they want to reach out and say, "Hey, I've got a great pitch for you," we're always interested in hearing what people have to say and bringing new people on board if someone's got something great.
That's great, and I know there are a lot of publications with Rue Morgue too, so there are probably a lot of opportunities there. So JD Estrada had another question, and that is, which sites are looking specifically for indie books to review, and what genres? And if for the magazines, are you looking for new authors or previously published authors?
Well, the San Francisco Review of Books is very happy to publish indie authors. It's something that I really like because they very, very rarely get the sort of attention that they deserve, I think. Anything, you know, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, as long as it's relevant, of course, as long as it's something that I think is coherent to send on to one of our reviewers, that's pretty much it. We're sort of an open field, if you will, for indie authors, and of course non-indie authors too. We run their work all the time, but the indie ones are something of my I guess specialty point of interest.
You may have a flood after this, Joseph.
Similarly, in Rue Morgue, I also really like to, when I'm putting together the book section every issue, I really like to strike a balance between, you know, major, you know, big 5 publisher releases and then small and medium-sized press releases, because there's a whole giant, like, small press scene burgeoning in horror, and indies too. I mean, I think some of the most, you know, a couple of the most incredible books I've read in recent years were self-published. So I think they're coming out of book and the independence, and I think it would really be sad to overlook a portion of that. But I mean, you know, we're a print magazine and we only have so much room every issue for reviews, so it's always a bit of a balancing act. You know, I want to get an indie in there, I want to get a small press in there, I want to get a couple mainstream things that people really want to get the scoop on in there as well, but we're limited to space, as most print publications are.
Well, we're online and we publish once a week. So we actually have a lot of flexibility to take indie publications in addition to the big 5. And I like to support indie publications, definitely indie authors in the book reviews. But again, they have to, the tough part is that they're judged by the same criteria as books from the big 5. So while the quality is definitely getting up there, is definitely getting a lot better, you still occasionally get the ones that are not quite there.
And for Unnerving, I guess, I do have a request page on the unnervingmagazine.com that that you can send me things, but I'm getting pretty picky. I usually only review you know, as many books as I can read in a month, so 5 or 6 at a max, and even then I'm getting lesser. So, but that's almost always indie, or a solid like 3/4 of the time.
Well, this is great news for indies because everyone is looking to submit, and I think they're going to be thrilled to hear all of this. So in submissions, what is something, whether it's when somebody submits or whether it's in the actual piece, what is something that really irritates you when an author submits their work? Maybe even more specifically with submissions, I know a lot of people dread, you know, sending something in even though they want to. What is something that you would say, never do this? Oh, just if you're muted. Yeah.
Not anymore. I think you really have to carefully judge, as much as this is possible, the work that you do. I mean, if you send something to be reviewed by, you know, a review of books, and it's really not up to par, the end result isn't going to be good for you. So I think people have to be as objective as possible about their own work, but of course that's much easier said than done. Perhaps it's almost impossible to do, but people should still strive for it anyway, just to make the process not only easier for the book review, but for the authors themselves.
I actually don't do negative reviews at all. I only do positive reviews at Bewildering Stories. And so basically, if a book isn't, the quality that I'm looking for, it won't get a review at all. So that could be one of the drawbacks. It really makes me sad, though, when I get a promising book or a promising idea and it hasn't been professionally edited. And that's one of the things that you can have with some indie publications. So, which is unfortunate. But when it's almost there and you're like, but I can't quite stump for this book, which is unfortunate.
I think for me, it's incomplete review packages. So if you're approaching a publication, you want to give the editor all the information you could possibly give about the book that you've got coming out. So when I get a review package, I want to see a little bit of information, a bio about the author. I want to know what date this book is coming out, so I know what time it is, because we have lead times and such in the magazine. I want to know what the author's website is. I want to know how to get in touch. I want to say I'm really excited about your book, and I want a synopsis. I can't tell you how many times, especially now in the computer age, someone will just send me an email and go, here's a review copy of my book. And there's an EPUB stuck to it. No other information. Help me out a little bit here. Us editors are busy. What's basics?
I guess it's mostly covered by everybody else here. But the one thing that I do get that everybody, it should be obvious maybe, but it's not, is I also sell ad space in the magazine, and I get people trying to buy a good review. Never, ever do that. Do not say I'm looking for reviews of my book and I'm also possibly interested in ad space. It's like I automatically just close the email. I'm not interested in that kind of situation.
So we definitely want to be reading the submission guidelines really closely, because when they're not followed, it just goes in the trash, or you annoy the person. And that's kind of the last thing you want to do. So, I mean, as far as I know that all of you think that's a given, but for anybody who thinks maybe I don't have to follow the submission guidelines, I think you should find what we've heard here tonight is super important if you want your piece read. So then what are you looking for in stories or the books you read? What makes it something that you in particular will love?
Well, when the SFRB runs a review, it's not really anything that I think I would love. A lot of the books that we run, I have absolutely no interest in. It's what I think people are really interested in. The goal of a good book review, I think, is to serve that portion of the public that still regularly reads books. So if you're able to do that, then I would hope that your reputation would build in time and you'd come to be known as a serious publication. So I just look for things that I think are well written, things that I think are timely, and things that perhaps, will still be relevant even a year down the line. That, of course, is tricky. No one can really predict the future. But to me, that's what a promising book would show for a potential review.
I think we look for the same things that agents look for. We're looking for voice. We're looking for good dialogue. We're looking for interesting characters. Basically, because I'm a writer first, before I'm an editor, before I'm a book reviewer, I want to find a book that makes me say, wow, I could never write that myself, something that impresses me that much. And so that would be like my 5-star type of review. So I look at the technical stuff in addition to just being blown away by the story.
All the things that both of those guys said, but also one thing I wanted to add about submitting review copies is once you submit the review copy, don't send an email every 2 days asking if it's going to be reviewed, asking if the editor's had a chance to look at it yet. Have you had a chance to read it? Definitely follow up. Follow-up emails are great. They help keep your book in an editor's mind. Do it as you would a job interview. Check in maybe a couple weeks after submitting it. Don't check in more than twice, perhaps, because suddenly you're going to become that person in that person's mind. Your name is going to get associated with, oh, that's the person that emails every 3 days to ask about their review copy. So, do keep in mind that if an editor says they've received it, give a little time, because oftentimes, especially at magazines like Rue Morgue, I don't do all the reviews myself. I have reviewing staff. So sometimes it just takes a while to see if someone gloms onto that book and takes it and decides that they want to cover it. So, you know, I'm not going to necessarily have an answer for you 2-3 days after you send in that review copy.
Along those lines, for our magazine, we just publish one review each issue, or one excerpt from a book. So we have reviews backed up for months sometimes. So, and we don't do the managing editor doesn't do the schedule until about 6 weeks ahead of time. So you might send in a book, there might be 3 months worth of books ahead of you. So you're not going to hear back for a couple months. So along the lines of what you're saying.
Yeah, just like you guys said, similar to lit agents in that way, for sure. How about you, Eddie?
I was just going to tack on to the end of that. It's a very uncomfortable conversation when an author does keep pestering you and you've started their book and you've had to put it aside because it wasn't for you, or, you know, one of the various reasons we'd already discussed. And you actually have to tell them that because they've decided to keep pestering you about whether the review's coming. So, you know, use your head a bit.
That's an awkward moment. I'm sure. I do have a question from the audience. So this is from Goendy Now, Joe. Thanks for asking this. He asks, what major change to your submission guidelines have you made in the last couple of years that you didn't have when you started? I like that one.
Well, the SFRB, as you know, if you look at the website, there aren't even any clear submission guidelines. I look at what people send, and if I think it meets the criteria that I just mentioned, I roll with it. I refer it to one of our reviewers. Since there really hasn't been a change, and the review was early 2017, we got going, but we didn't really start, I guess you could say, getting into full gear until this year. There was an earlier San Francisco review of books, but the name was revived for the present publication that I work for. So answering the question is kind of hard since we haven't had any changes, but I think publications, generally speaking, should have, you know, it's good to have rigid submission guidelines for obvious reasons, but you don't want to have them be constricting, because then you might wind up missing out on something that you didn't even know was missing from your publication. There have been some reviews that we've run that I would never have thought that when I started at the SFRB that we would run, but they've wound up getting some very good readership and people genuinely seem to like them. So it's always good to have an open mind with this sort of thing. I think I'll just leave it at that.
Well, for Unnerving, and speaking of submissions, as opposed to review submissions, the content submissions and who can submit their fiction. In the last 2 years, I've had to do a bit of tweaking because there's a certain surge of types of people that I don't want to give a platform to. They run around with tiki torches and swastikas, so I've started to call that type of person, and that's about the only change I've had to make in the last 2 years for submissions. And I have seen that a lot around other places, that they're stating they want to be positive, even if it's horror, even if it's like gore horror. To be positive is the way to go, rather than having, you know, the negative influence creeping in.
Alison, Monica, do you guys have any changes or anything that you have updated? It's not in the last couple of years, but since you started?
Oops. That's more in the lines of what the managing editor does at the magazine. So I don't really have guidelines for our general submissions. For book reviews, I'm sort of laid back. So I'm like, send it, I'll take a look. If it's not up my alley, then I generally, unfortunately, I don't send rejections. I don't send say, no, I'm not going to review it. It just won't get reviewed. But I don't really limit myself to what I'll take a look at. I'll take a look at any genre, and I don't really ask authors to send much with the submissions.
I've been with Rue Morgue since 2003, which is a huge amount of time, especially when it comes to technology and how technology has changed. And I think the biggest change isn't so much what I like, I want the same review copy. Send me all your horror books. Indie, not indie, nonfiction, fiction, YA, don't care. Send me your horror books. But the big difference that's changed since 2003 to 2018 is I'm not asking publishers for a lot of physical copies anymore. I understand that publishing industry is crunched. I understand that I now, because of the nature of the way the world works, have reviewers that write for me all over North America and Europe. So for me, I tend to save your money. Don't send a book in the mail. Don't risk it getting lost. Just get me a Mobi, get me an EPUB, get me a PDF, whatever my reviewer prefers. And, we can do this without the overhead that was required 15 years ago when everything had to go through the post. But I mean, as far as content changes wise, not so much other than just keeping up on, new cool digital, horror stuff that's coming out, the way that horror fiction has changed a little bit in the digital and multimedia world. Like, we're definitely interested in all the cutting edge stuff, but, books are still books.
Absolutely. It's great to hear that. So I have a question for the book reviewers, and that is, I wanted to know what pushes a book to the top of your TBR pile, if that's possible. Maybe that isn't something you do ever, but is there anything that you spot it and you say, wow, somebody needs to read this, or I need to read it right now, and it's just going to go right up to the top of my list?
If something is really, really relevant, like it pertains to some current event that has a lot of attention, then that would be it. Generally speaking, I don't like pushing things to the top of any schedule because you never really know what's going to be relevant tomorrow, let alone even later today. But if it's something that seems to have teeth and it's something that's really, I guess, pertinent to whatever is going on at any given time, and it doesn't look like that will be out of the news cycle for the next week or so, that would be something. But other than that, I don't like to really screw around with the schedule too much. I think people can waste a lot of time doing that, and in the process, more or less obstruct the flow of reviews at their publication, which is never a good thing. I think people like to expect a certain sort of review out at a certain time. They don't want to get bored, but they at least want to know that you'll give them something consistent.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I tend to keep the order of the books that I received and are going to review sort of in the same order that I received them in, and publish them in. The only thing that would push it up to the top, I guess, is like I like to vary the genres. So I review any genre, so including poetry, including all speculative genre, literary. So I like to, if I get, two great literary books back to back, I won't necessarily review them back to back because I don't want that to be in back to back issues since we're a weekly publication.
For Rue Morgue, sometimes we have books that have a lot of hype, or authors that have a lot of hype or buzz around them. When we get a review copy, we make sure that goes in the next issue because it's a hot book. People aren't going to want to wait the extra 2 months to read a review of that. They're going to want to know what Rue Morgue's word on that new book is right away. So sometimes a book from a major that's got a lot of anticipation will sometimes move a slightly smaller release back a little bit because the shelf life of that smaller release is a bit longer than that big book that everyone's running a review of, like week, month of release.
And in terms of short stories, then, what would make you immediately pay attention to a submission? Is it pretty much the same type, like when it's going in a magazine and it's a, just a short story that maybe, I don't know if it would be for a special edition or anything where you have like maybe a particular call? It sounds like a lot of you accept anything that doesn't have like special episodes necessarily, but would you say it's kind of the same rules for short stories, even just if it's really relevant or if it's from somebody who's really relevant and buzzing right now? For those of you who accept short stories, might be Eddie.
Yeah, for the short stories, I get so many every time I'm open. Like for an open window, it's usually around 600, and there's say 5 or 6 stories accepted. So I run that in order of when I get them. So that's basically, I do 3 passes. The first one is like the first paragraph about has this irritated me? Is this written, you know, in a high level of quality? You know, the quick things the quick turnoffs I look for, and that calls about half of the submissions I get. As for somebody who might be buzzing or things like that, those people I usually have to seek out myself and up my pay grade to get. Unfortunately for me, I guess, but that's how it is.
Well, since you mentioned about the first paragraph, I did want to ask how long authors have to impress each of you when you start reading something. And so some editors or even literary agents have said it's the first sentence and that's it. You know, and other ones say first paragraph. You have a couple of pages. Some will say, you know, like I'll read the first 10 pages and that's, you know, either I'm going to ask for the whole thing or not. You know, it really depends. So I wonder how long somebody has to impress you. It sounds like you, Eddie, they have about a paragraph's time to impress you.
Well, it depends on the length of the submission. They have a paragraph, typically the first go through to turn me off of it. If they don't turn me off of it, I hold on and keep it aside. When it's for long, that's for short fiction. For novels, I completely understand that that's a whole big book, so you can fumble a little bit in a spot, and it doesn't really necessarily shine a light on what the rest of the story looks like. So I do try to give it 10 pages, but quite often, what you're getting in that first paragraph or first sentence is. It keeps going all the way through if it's irritating.
I completely agree with that. I usually give it about 2 pages to the first chapter. And the writing doesn't have to impress me to keep me reading. It really is. I'm looking for things that are wrong about the submission, unfortunately. I'm looking for things that like errors, awkward dialogue, I don't know, awkward spots in the narrative. So I'm looking for what the book does wrong. So, and if there are enough, like almost 3 strikes, you're out, then I won't continue reading after that.
How about Joseph and Monica?
Well, the San Francisco Review of Books doesn't accept short stories right now, even though we do run poetry, historical articles, and there's a good reason for that, because I find it difficult to gauge whether or not a short story is going to have public interest. Some people would say that you could figure it out by reading the first paragraph. I think that's good for getting reader attention, but I don't necessarily know whether or not you could judge the whole story by that first paragraph or even the first few. So short stories, perhaps in the future we'll run them, but they're definitely, they're the toughest, I think, of any sort of, I guess, article for a book review to run, just because they're multifaceted. Even though they're short, they're long relative to a review or an article like about, you know, history or something like that. So you have to be careful with them. Of course, they have their place, but they are tricky.
Rue Morgue doesn't run short fiction, so I have no comments on short fiction. With review copies, I probably tend to stick things out a lot longer than I should. But if it gets to a point where I'm in a book and I can't think of a single positive thing to say in the review, like it's getting me that down and it's just going to be a review that's just going to be a slam from beginning to end, chances are I'll put the book down and find something else to read and write about, because I'm more interested in reviews that are at least balanced. If I have nothing nice to say, why say it?
I know that I think it was Alison who mentioned that if the proofreading is really bad, then, you know, it's just going to get passed immediately. And I was wondering if there has ever been a case where any of you have read something where the proofreading was bad, but the story was really good. And maybe you've sent it back and said something like, look, I want to publish this, but you really done that before?
I think that happens with, especially with short story submissions for us, going back to short stories, where the Bewildering Stories is known for working with new writers a lot. And so often if we find something, um, the idea is good, the writing is good, there's some problems with execution, we most often will ask for a rewrite rather than just reject it. We work very closely with authors to polish their submissions so that they're publishable. I don't think I've ever done that for book reviews at all. Yeah.
With the short, if it comes in and it needs a lot of work, for me, it's just simply the competition is so high that if something needs a ton of work and I only have X number of hours to exist on the planet, it's a lot easier just to grab a seasoned, well-written, well-proofed story.
How about for Rue Morgue? I would assume, Joseph, that for books, it's the same situation. You don't send a book back and say, hey, if you proofread this, it might be different. But, how about for, well, I guess it wouldn't be that case for Rue Morgue either, because you said you don't publish short fiction, right?
No, we don't. And, there have been times in book reviews where I've said, this book, the story is fantastic, but holy crap, has it fallen down in editorial? So, that's something that I think is a very fair thing to call out in a review, where it's like, this is a great story, but, if you're going to invest the time in reading it, be warned that the proofreading may drive you mental. So, But I mean, as far as like things like features and stuff that writers submit to Rue Morgue, we do full editorials. So, once something comes in, it goes through all 3 editors and before it goes to print. So, they're kind of getting the full if you're writing for Rue Morgue, you're getting the full editorial treatment. That's not something that you do before. Obviously, you polish your piece as best you can, but it's not something that we expect you to do before, you hand it over to us. That's something that we do with you. It's an editorial process that we do with each of our writers when there's.
When I'm reading a book or a short story and the punctuation is off, the syntax is bad, so on and so forth, it's a turnoff. It really is. And it makes it hard, even if the book has great promise or the story has great promise, it's hard to take it seriously then. It's almost like it's unprofessional. I say almost like because some people might genuinely not know what to do with grammar, syntax, but still, it's a huge, huge mark against the book or the story. So I would be inclined, after reading something like that, not to push it any further at the SFRB. But then again, if somebody, were to take a different approach and give something the time needed to polish it, they might wind up with a great missed opportunity on my part. You never know. But the SFRB publishes about 10 articles a day, a lot of which now are stuff we've published before, but still it's a lot to manage on a daily basis. So to deal with, a short story that has, it's just not written, grammar-wise, that's not done well, that's a lot of time and a lot of effort, and on our end, it would be a losing proposition. But if you're a publication that doesn't publish every day, then I would imagine it might be a very good idea to take the time with these stories or books that you might forward to a reviewer.
We do have a question from the chat. Thank you. If you could tell authors one thing you would like to see them do more of, what would that be? I'll give you a moment to think about it.
For me, that would be easy. I would like to see more, I don't know, it's a bit vague, more interesting characters you don't see every day. I love the trend nowadays for having more representative characters, more people of color, more LGBT characters. I think that's great. I think that's fantastic. And I would love to review more books like that.
Joseph, did you have one?
For me, it would be to have books that really, I think, I'm a nonfiction fan first and foremost. We could even do this with fiction. So books that sort of relate the human experience in a way that's profound, that's, you know, I think a bit broad, but in a way that's interesting, that's captivating, that's different. It's not so much like filling a niche or something like that. It's really just telling a story that might have been told, similar stories to it, I mean, many times before, but if you can do it in an interesting and innovative way, that really catches my attention. And I think reviewers appreciate that. Now people are so used to, you know, authors trying to keep up with trends, what people think are interesting, so on and so forth. But if you read something that's really unique in how it tells its story, a story obviously that has good characters, and a story that has a message which, even if you might not agree with it personally, it's still something that you feel has been worth your time to read it, that's really something else. To me, that's my favorite sort of book. And that's the sort of thing I would certainly be inclined to give publicity to with the SFRB.
I wish every author in 2018 would have easy to find contact information for themselves and or their representation on their website and or social media. Because as an editor, sometimes I'll read your book and you haven't sent me that awesome little press sheet that I really wished you'd send me. And I love your book and I want to do a one-page feature on it and I want to interview you. And now I didn't get a press sheet with your book, so I don't know how to get in touch with your publisher or your PR person. So now I got to go out and find you. So in those situations, please, please, please don't make yourself hard to find, because if you're too hard to find, I'm going to jump on to the next author that I might want to feature and you're going to miss your chance. So there's no excuse in 2018 not to be able to be found on the internet by journalists that are interested in talking to you about your work.
That is absolutely true. I should have thought to mention that as well, but it's on point.
I guess for me to add on to the good points that were already mentioned, for me, because I read so much horror and crime, mostly suspense stuff for review and then for submission for publication, whether books or short stories, it's that there be a slightly new twist on the tropes. So often you're getting the exact same rehashing of, you know, what this vampire's up to, what this werewolf's up to, where it would be nice to just have a slight little interesting twist every once in a while. Coming of age stories, there's always seems to be one boy that's a writer. You know, there's just all these little things that are constant, and it starts to wear on you. So I'd like to see a little twist in the trope.
Those are great answers. And Joe also specifically said about Monica and Joseph's answer about submissions and when you can't find someone's information, that he totally agrees. It's very frustrating. So I do have one specifically for Eddie. Unnerving magazine is actually doing short story and novel critiques now. And I was wondering if you could tell us how you started offering that service, and if it's peers. I also wanted to know, for short stories, do people submit a short story to you that they want critiqued, and then they resubmit it for publication once they fix it?
Okay, so how the critiques work is I leave them open when I'm close to regular submissions. I leave them open because they started because I got constant requests for it. When I first started running the magazine, I had people asking me, can you read my novel that's unpublished, and can you tell me what's wrong with it? And I was always, no. It takes forever to read something. And so the critique for the novel, basically what I've done in the past is I go through and I find all the stuff that redundancies and you know, just flagrant problems, mostly storyline inconsistencies and all this kind of hinky dialogue, just any little thing. I think the last one I had, I had a 2-page report and then like 170 notes through like 75,000 words. As for the short stories, which I take every critique and I'm considering it for publication when it's sent in. If somebody wanted to send it in a second time after I've critiqued it, I'm not considering it anymore. That's like buying your way in, and that's not cool. So if I have had somebody submit it twice because they're like, okay, you told me the original rough problems, can you look at it again? So I said, well, okay, I'll look at it as if I were going to publish it. And I beat him up in a different way than I beat him up the first time. And cool thing, he told me he sold the story right after I did it. So I guess it all worked out for him.
That's a great service. It sounds like it could be super helpful, especially I know that not everybody can afford to have like a full-on editor. And so I'm not sure how much that your service costs, but to at least have like a critique is super valuable for a lot of people, especially those who want to submit somewhere. So I did have a question that we sort of touched on before, but I want to ask in a slightly different way. Lot of submission guidelines and specifically for queries. And I know that not all of you have necessarily queries, but sometimes an author has gone way out of their way, like way outside of what the publisher asks for. And the publisher ends up publishing, or rather asking for the full manuscript or something similar, specifically because of their originality. And so I wanted to ask if that is something that just has sometimes covered when people submit totally different things than what has been requested and they actually get accepted, even though it's the opposite of what they're supposed to be doing. So I wondered if that's something that you've ever done or would do.
Do not do that to a nonfiction magazine with any nonfiction article you've pitched. This has happened to us. It has created nightmares. Because when you're placing a nonfiction article, you're talking to the studio to get the right images to go with it, to get the right sidebars to go with it. So when you're expecting one thing and a writer decides that they're going to go off on a whole different track with that, it messes up every single thing that goes with that piece in the magazine. And you're not going to make any friends with any editors who've accepted a pitch that you've suddenly turned into something else. That might be different in the land of fiction, but in the nonfiction, not cool.
I'd agree with that. I'd say stick to the rules. I mean, the rules are there for a reason. It's to show the editor that you respect them enough to read what they've written, what they're actually looking for. So I guess if the author's not going to read the guidelines, why should the editor read the submission? That sounds a bit harsh, but the rules are there for a reason. We've gone through many years figuring out what we want and what we don't want. And so if you send us what we don't want, we're not going to accept it.
I have, this happens regularly that people actually write, I see in your submission guidelines that this is what you're looking for, but this is what I have, so I'm going to send it to you anyway. And I don't read it. I never, ever read it. I don't care. If you can't be bothered and it's not what I'm looking for, then it's not what I'm looking for. It's fine. I don't know. If you're keeping track, it's just another negative, a rejection slip for you.
Thankfully, the SFRB hasn't had this problem as of yet being the key words, but it's very disrespectful. I think that's just the best way to put it. Uncool, that was used as well. If people do that, I think it speaks to almost that they hold, not that they hold your publication in contempt, but that they don't take you very seriously about what you're looking for. And if they don't take you seriously, it's hard to see why you should take them seriously.
Yeah, I can definitely see it from all of your perspectives. And whenever I hear a story like that, which is very rare, I always think, that was probably a fluke and you just happened to hit the right editor on the right day by some coincidence, But I can totally understand where you guys are coming from. We have also reviewed this a little bit, but if you reject a work, do you send any feedback or do you just send a rejection email? Now, I know, Alison, you said you don't send rejections. And like maybe just a little bit, when else do you send rejections and what do you include?
Oh, we do send rejections, but we do try to be very author friendly. So if we think a submission has a lot of promise, we'll definitely ask for a rewrite rather than just a straight rejection. But there are some submissions that we don't feel that we can help. But every submission that we receive, we actually do give feedback, and at least 2 readers on our team give feedback. So sometimes they have a lot to say, and I've sent, as a coordinating editor, I actually am the one who communicates with the authors. And so sometimes I've sent like 1 or 2 pages of feedback from my review readers. Yeah, so we're definitely known as, if you're looking for some feedback on a story, you're not sure if it's publishable or not, we are definitely very author friendly, and we will give that very detailed feedback.
I don't do anything. I send the rejection slip. It says, thanks for trying. Try me again. Maybe read it. I think it also gives a link to where to buy the magazine to understand what I am actually looking for. But it's a lot of work. I could, if you have a bunch of readers, I guess that would be helpful. I tackle it by myself because I'm like that. I would rather not have input, but it's very difficult. I would say maybe the top 10% that don't get in, I give as encouraging a note as I can, like, please try me again, because I dug this. I just happened and didn't dig it quite as much as these other ones. So
Monica and Joseph, what about you?
I typically don't send out letters of that kind. I might have once upon a time, but I can't remember. They are a lot of work to write. That's principally it. Especially if you don't want to do a form letter, which is, you know, some people might find that to be somewhat disrespectful is a strong word, but it could be perceived as cheap. So, but then again, you know, if I had more time, I probably would write those letters. They're not bad ideas. They're very good ideas. I would actually rather write them than not. But it seems odd to write a letter to someone when you have the time than not write a letter to someone else. And if you get a reputation for doing that, people might seem to think you're playing favorites over time. And I certainly wouldn't want the publication to be thought of in that way.
Morgue doesn't get a lot of like unsolicited finished pieces. We get more pitches. So, you know, as long as the pitch is in our wheelhouse and it seems like someone's put some effort into it, I'll always kind of give a yay, nay back. If someone's sending a pitch and they obviously haven't even bothered to research what Rue Morgue is, and it's very obvious from their pitch, then don't necessarily give them a response to that. But, you know, if it's a horror-related pitch, even if it's something, you know, I can't run because someone else covered it a couple issues ago, I'll just say, hey, great pitch. We ran a piece on that a couple issues ago and it's too soon to revisit or something like that. But yeah, we don't tend to get finished things that people want to place in the magazine. That's not how that works for us anyways.
Yeah, that's good to know. I know that some people really, well, actually, I'm sure most writers really value whatever feedback they get. So it's great to know who does send feedback. But I also wanted to know something else about your submission process. Even for short stories, and a lot of times I'll go and I'll be excited to submit something, you know, my piece matches the guidelines and everything. And then I go on to Submittable, where almost everyone has to submit their piece. And all of a sudden it says, put in your cover letter. And I say, oh, cover letter, oh my. And then I have to go and figure out what I should be putting in here, you know. And some places will give you guidelines on what they want to hear. And some places just say, put your cover letter, whatever it may be. So I wondered if any of you had cover letters that you require, and if you do, and maybe even if you don't, what would your recommendations be for what you should be writing in there?
We don't require cover letters at Rue Morgue, but if you're approaching me as someone who wants to write for me, put a little introduction to yourself in the email. I don't want to see a formal cover letter. I do want to see a CV. I do want to see some writing samples for sure. I don't need a formal cover letter, but, you know, who are you? How long have you been writing for? What types of horror do you like? What parts of the magazines do you want to write for? Do you consider yourself a movie person? Are you a book person? Do you worship video games? What types of horror do you like? You know, tell me a little bit about yourself so that when I then go and I read your submissions, I'm already sitting there going, yeah, we might have the other thing that writing a little blurb, it lets me see how much attention, because I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten over the 15 or plus years I've been at Rue Morgue that have subject lines that say things like, "I want to writ for your magazine." Well, I'm probably not going to answer that, because if you can't proof your subject line of your email enough to spell "write" correctly, you're probably not a writer I want on my team. So, you know, it's one of those things. It's like your cover letter tells me a little bit about yourself, but it also tells me a little bit about how you put stuff together, because I don't know, those writing samples that you're showing me might have gone through an editor already. So, you know, when I'm seeing that little blurb from you, that's the real you writing. So it gives me a little bit a hint about what I'm going to be able to see from your raw work when I eventually do see your raw work.
I would say we're actually the exact opposite. We don't, both for book reviews and for submissions, we tend not to pay much attention to the cover letters. We just focus on the work itself. And then afterwards, if we choose to publish the short story, or after I rate the book review, I'll look up the author. But yeah, we just go by the content of the submission that we get, pretty much.
I might be different for Rue Morgue, because a lot of the writers that are approaching us to be writers want to become staff writers. They want to contribute not just one piece or one, you know what I mean, one story once. They want to contribute more often. So I want to know more about them. If they're only like, hey, I did this interview, I want to do this one-off thing, I don't really care. But you know, it's like if you're coming to me and you want to be part of the team, I need to know what you can do. I need to know what you know.
As far as the two different streams of this, for the books, if it's a for review, a submission for me to review a novel or collection or novella or whatever, the whole publicity form is the way to go. Like the press release, I'd like that. But if it's for a submission, I do have a bit of a preference. And it's not always it's quite often after I've done that first breeze through that I'm reading it. I've come back to the submission after it passed the first, like, this isn't annoying me. And I'm looking at, it's usually like 2 sentences, 1 sentence about the story, and then another sentence that says its length and genre. And then after that, I like to know also maximum, because I know people like to treat the submission cover letter as like the resume. So I just say, please tell me your 3 fanciest sales, rather than listing, you know, some people have been writing for 20 years. And if you're just, you know, pumping them out like Bradbury style or whatever, you can have like 200 publications, and some people feel the need to list them all. And it's just like, I don't care. That's too many. Just write, I've been published like 100 times, and here are the 3 coolest ones. And that's about it. If it's too long, I don't read any of it. I'm just like, that's too much. I don't have the time.
I personally don't have any use for cover letters. You know, obviously, if you're going to send a book that'll be reviewed, something that I would forward on to a reviewer, that'd have to be in a PDF file or a Kindle file or something like that. But if somebody's sending me a review itself, I'd rather just it be in the email. I don't like downloading things from emails on general principle for, I think, understandable reasons. So, you know, the cover letters worked well in times gone by. When I started out submitting things to publications, they required the cover letter. I don't think very many places do nowadays. There's something antiquated, generally speaking, but you know, some people are still sticklers for them. So for any writer who's listening to this, it's still good to know how to write one just in case.
Yeah, definitely. It can be useful for a job. It can be useful for these things. It can be useful for pretty much everything. And I just wanted to stick in there, Eddie, to your point about if it's too long. I actually know someone, or maybe even 2 people, who if an email is past where they have to scroll, they just don't read past that point, and they just ignore it and reply to whatever they read. So definitely, yeah, generally, you know, follow the guidelines if they tell you, and if not, then yeah, I would say keep it short and simple. Just like everyone here is saying, I think it makes perfect sense. So this has really been a great chat. Thank you all so much for coming. And let's just go around and tell everyone where they can find you. Let's start with Alison. Oh, I think you're muted, Alison.
Can you hear me now? I have a couple websites, AlisonMcBain.com. I am also the lead editor for my writers group. We produce an anthology once a year, and it's fairfieldscribes.com. I'm on Twitter and Facebook at Alison McBain at Fairfield Scribes, and I'm the book reviews editor and coordinating editor for Bewildering Stories. So it's bewilderingstories.com.
Great. And how about you, Eddie?
Okay, so the magazine is unnervingmagazine.com. My personal website is jiffypopandhorror.com. I'm on Twitter for both the magazine and myself. I have a Facebook thing for the magazine. I guess you just probably the easiest way to find the Facebook, I guess, is you Google it or go to the unnervingmagazine.com. That has all the submission information, which I do also use Submittable, which is the easiest and cleanest way to do it. Also, I guess I have an iTunes and SoundCloud account for the podcast. I don't have a clue what the string of numbers and letters are to take you to that exact point, but it exists. You can probably find it somehow. I don't know.
Send people on a treasure hunt, and if they find it, they get to be published. Huh? How about for you, Monica?
Well, of course, you can find Rue Morgue, the magazine, at rue-morgue.com, and on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just look for Rue Morgue. If you want to find me or any of my stuff personally, I am Monica S. Kuebler on Facebook and on Twitter. I run a website called Library of the Damned, which is all about horror fiction and nonfiction. And if you want to find me on Instagram or Pinterest, that would be Death of Cool. And if you actually want to kind of stalk my fiction writing, which is something I also do, you can find me as Death of Cool on Wattpad, where I've been doing a serial YA vampire. So that's me.
Great. And finally, how about you, Joseph?
Well, you can find the SFRB at sanfranciscoreviewofbooks.com. It's a lot to type out, so if you just search the publication in Google, I think the website will come up first, then perhaps our Wikipedia page, but we're pretty easy to get to. We also have a YouTube presence where I do interviews about current events with the head of the SFRB's editorial board, so you can find us there, as well as on Twitter and Facebook. But it's important because there's also a San Francisco Book Review, which has nothing to do with the San Francisco Review of Books. The San Francisco Book Review is a for-pay book review website, which really irks me because people get it confused with the SFRB, and that is not the best of things, really, for one's reputation. But if you just see San Francisco Review of Books, that's us, and I hope people check us out.
Great. And thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you to our panelists. This was really great and full of information that every writer can use. And thank you so much for everyone who came live. And for any of you that are watching after the fact, you know where to find the Writers Edge Show. You can find us here. We are also at thewritersedgeshow.com, and you can find us under The Writers Edge Show on Facebook. As for me, you can find me at christystratus.com, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. I have a Creative Writer's Edge showcase that will be coming next Thursday, and you can pretty much find me everywhere. Pinterest, just search my name, I will be all over. Our next panel is going to be on September 27th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and we are going to be talking about conventions. Have two event coordinators from When Words Collide and Creative Inc., so be sure to stop in for that one. We'll see you next time.